Alrighty, folks. This is According to Callus, and this is going to be the first of 4 episodes I'm going to pump out tonight. Vacation time is upon me, so I need to make sure I leave you all something to think about while I'm gone. So I've already done part 1. I've explained the situation, what we're going to be doing going forward, and that is, I'm going to lay out a scenario of what's more likely, or which is more likely. Now, the first episode, of course, we did guns, right? Why not? So tonight, I'm going to take on the big kahuna. That's it. Abortion. So now this is a topic or an issue that is near and dear to the hearts of many, including my own eldest daughter. So before I tackle this, I'm just going to put it out that I'm not looking for you to agree with me. I'm not looking for you to ratify my belief. I am merely looking for you to consider which is the more likely outcome, 1 or 2, or perhaps am I missing something? Is there something else that could be happening? So come join me on the podcast, and I'll be there for about another 10 to 15 minutes, spelling out what the possible options are. So as we continue, now I am a child of the 70s and 80s. So when I was young, we heard the mantra that the only abortions were backroom or back alley abortions, and people were literally dying in the streets with coat hangers. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I always suspected it was hyperbole. Did it happen? Sure. Was it a common event? I doubt it. Bill Clinton came along in the 90s and said that he wanted them to be safe, legal, and rare, which he was trying to thread the needle there, if you will. And I can appreciate that, right? Bill's a smart guy. I mean, he obviously gamed that one out. So herein lies the rub. Abortion is the only medical procedure that I am aware of that has a higher than 50% mortality. 2 go in, 1 comes out, sometimes neither come out. Abortion is largely used for what I would call convenience sake, right? So they trot out the rape and incest as if that somehow makes everything okay. And most conservatives will say, fine, we're going to give you that. Fine, you can have your rape and incest, which amounts to 2% of abortions, but that gives them cover for the other 98%. So the challenge I have is, when you were in kindergarten, your mommy taught you 2 wrongs don't make a right. So if you were raped or otherwise exploited, does then committing murder make it right? Now, I know some of you right now are cringing on the idea that I've called it murder, but you can get into the medical establishment and they can tell you, well, it's not quite a human, or it's only a potential human, whatever. This is the same medical community that apparently can't tell the difference between a boy and a girl. This is the same medical community that ignores the difference between the XX chromosome and XY chromosome designation. Keeping in mind, there are rare circumstances where something other than XX or XY presents itself, and those are genetic abnormalities that often create all sorts of issues that need to be dealt with. But the interesting thing is that they're still a human. They were still created in the image of God, whatever their chromosome count is or layout. We don't just toss them aside like trash. We don't just dismember them and dispose of them because it's inconvenient. Now, the certain irony that I find also in the idea that anybody that is not white is a fan of abortion. And I know that, it's kind of been papered over and hidden, But one of the primary motives behind abortion was to limit the amount of non-white children born. It's no coincidence that a good number of those so-called health clinics are in communities that are not predominantly white. Now, for me personally, that doesn't affect me, right? And you can say I should have no opinion in the matter because I'm a white male, straight, blah, 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 blah. Here's the thing. If I have no opinion, then nobody has an opinion. You can choose to minimize the value of my opinion. You can choose to ignore my opinion. You can choose to contradict my opinion, but I'm still going to have an opinion. And the unique thing about that is that so can you. Right? We have to listen to all sorts of crazy stuff that we're being told now and have been for the last several years about how a 4-year-old boy can choose to be a girl and vice versa. But that's completely normal, and that should be encouraged. How that, I'm not even going to go down that rabbit trail. But this is all to distract from the idea that we're killing babies, in my opinion. My opinion is that, well, I'm not enthusiastic about the idea of locking up women who kill their baby. I am more enthusiastic about the idea that if somebody's doing a medical procedure, the ends in the termination of the child, that perhaps that person should be the one being locked up. Perhaps that person should be the one facing consequences. I'm not really comfortable with the idea of a doctor who's supposed to take an oath that used to state you should do no harm, is in fact violently dismembering and destroying a baby. And then we've got several states that have conveniently found excuses to expand that, beyond the 23rd week to, hours or days after they're born. We've got some eugenicists out there saying we should have a year or two. Of course, this is directly coupled with, letting old people die, Andrew Cuomo. So I've got to ask myself, when I was that child in the 80s and my extended family or conservative people I knew rallied on the idea that if we allow this, these other things would follow. Now, this is often referred to as a slippery slope, right? And it's called a fallacy. But the reality is, in this specific instance, it is held true. It's not the only instance where it's held true, but it has held true. We're openly advocating for euthanasia. We're openly advocating for killing babies after they're born. And we're all supposed to be okay with this. We're supposed to accept that this is normal. The same Greek and Roman societies that took part of this have been vilified for the fact that they had some form of slavery, and therefore they must be despised. Yet, they are the same societies that felt that if a baby wasn't perfect, it needed to be destroyed. Now, taking off the 21st century lenses and go back to that time period, there were some practical reasons why that might have been a necessity. There are some practical reasons why it just was not advisable to have a child that realistically wasn't going to have a future. That doesn't change the fact that that child was born. It still has the, part of the image of God, and so has an intrinsic value that we are supposed to respect. But these same cultures and civilizations largely ceased doing that upon the widespread introduction of Christianity. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that we have allowed this to happen, and we are going to pay the consequences. So now that I've laid all of that out, the question is, if we were to make abortion illegal, would we have women dying in the streets? Would we have women having, 9 children and dying? Would we have these backroom abortions where they're using coat hangers? And you know what? I don't think that's the case. I don't think that would ever happen again. And let me tell you why. We have the so-called abortion pill, right? Now, I'm not comfortable with it. I think it's a terrible thing. But if we're going to split hairs and there's no implantation, or we're preventing fertilization, or we're preventing the egg even being released, it's not quite the same thing of having an implanted baby on the uterus and then going in and ripping it apart. It's not the same thing as sticking the scissors in the back of the skull and then vacuuming out the brain. It's not the same thing as, well, we delivered a normal, perfectly healthy baby, but it's inconvenient for the mother, so an hour later we snuff it out. But the simpler solution is this. You know, we often heard the states' rights argument. Particularly when I was young, there was still a good number of the population that thought there was some validity to that. And, you know, it had been kind of poisoned by some of the stuff that went on in the South before I was born. But the reality is, if we went and made this revert back to the states, because the states actually have the sovereignty over this issue, and the states actually have the controlling law, I would imagine that the vast majority of states would recognize that they have no business killing babies, and they shouldn't tolerate murder. Now, there will be a number of states like California, New York, New Jersey, and apparently now Virginia, where it'd be perfectly legal. And you know what? I'm sure the people that are that desperate to go terminate their pregnancy will find a way to go to one of those states and have their baby executed. And what happens in those states stays in those states. And if they get caught, rather than punishing them, we'll just give them a permanent residence in that other state. Right? It would correct itself. People that want to go kill their babies before they're born, they can go live in those states. And the rest of us will be just fine without them. So there won't be a bunch of people dying in the streets. They will self-relocate. They will self-adjust. And, you know, medical technology does allow for prevention of that so-called problem before it becomes an issue. And again, I'm setting aside that ethical problem there as to maybe possibly terminating the fertilized embryo before implantation. But if we just assume that it's a preventative thing and we stand by that, maybe we could live with that. Maybe that is the compromise solution. If you want to be a baby murderer, there's a half a dozen states in the union. They'll allow you to do that. Heck, they'll even pay you to do it. But the rest of us, the rest of our states, we want no part of that. We don't want to subsidize murder. We get to opt out. You know, this also has great ways of translating into other terrible issues that we have to deal with. So perhaps in a future episode, I'll elaborate on that. So again, the question is, which is more likely? Are we going to have a bunch of people just dying on the streets from their coat hanger abortions? Or will life go on and people just kind of migrate to where they're more comfortable? Will the states, will the federalism kick in and self-solve the problem? So, what do you think? This is an opportunity to where you can respond. You can post either on the post that I am going to share this on, or you can go to the provider of the podcast. Put in your answer. If you think this is a fairly good way of looking at this and you would like to share it, please do. And I will be back shortly with the next episode. Thank you and have a good night.